Somewhere in a damp European forest, clinging to the underside of a leaf still wet with morning dew, a common amber snail begins to do something it has never done before. It climbs. Not downward, toward the cool, dark soil where it has spent its entire life hiding from the sun, upward, toward the light, toward the exposed top of a stem, where it will sit plainly, grotesquely visible in broad daylight. This is suicidal behavior for a snail. These soft-bodied creatures survive precisely because they avoid exposure. They are nocturnal. They hug the shadows. They press themselves into crevices and beneath rotting bark, staying invisible to the birds that would swallow them whole. But this snail doesn't hide. It parks itself on the highest perch it can find, stretches out its tentacles, and waits. And if you looked closely at those tentacles, the two delicate eye stalks rising from the snail's head, you would see something that does not belong in nature. They're pulsating. One or both of the tentacles have swollen to several times their normal size. The translucent skin has been replaced by thick, opaque bands of bright green, brown, and white, rippling in rhythmic, hypnotic waves. The tentacle throbs like a heartbeat, expanding and contracting in a pattern that looks, from a distance, exactly like a fat, juicy caterpillar wriggling on a branch. It is not a caterpillar. It is a parasitic flatworm called Leucochloridium paradoxum, and nothing about this organism is normal. The pulsating caterpillar is a structure called a broodsac, a living tube-shaped sac of larvae packed tightly inside the snail's own eye stalk, pressing against the thin skin, hijacking the tentacle and transforming it into a biological neon sign, a lure, bait. The snail cannot see out of the infected eye. It doesn't matter. The snail is no longer making its own decisions. The parasite has overridden the snail's most fundamental survival instincts: avoid light, avoid exposure, avoid open spaces, and replaced them with a single unwavering command: climb into the open and stay there. The performance is designed for one audience: birds. A songbird scanning the canopy from above sees exactly what the parasite wants it to see: a bright, wriggling caterpillar sitting in plain view on a leaf. An easy meal. The bird swoops down and plucks the swollen tentacle clean off the snail's head. It swallows what it believes is an insect. It has just ingested hundreds of parasitic larvae. The cycle is complete. The bird's digestive tract is the parasite's promised land, the only environment where Leucochloridium paradoxum can reach sexual maturity and reproduce. Inside the bird's gut, the larvae develop into adult flatworms, mate, and produce eggs that are excreted with the bird's droppings onto leaves and soil below, where the next generation of snails will unknowingly consume them while grazing on vegetation. One host builds the trap, the other springs it, and the parasite engineers the entire transaction. But to understand just how alien this manipulation is, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the moment the snail sealed its own fate by eating something invisible. A common amber snail, Succinia putris, grazes along a forest floor. Its rasping tongue, called a radula, scrapes across leaves and decaying plant matter, pulling in nutrients. On one of those leaves sits a microscopic smear of bird feces. Embedded within it are the eggs of Leucochloridium paradoxum. The snail consumes them without any awareness that it has just invited an architect of horror into its body. The eggs hatch inside the snail's digestive system. Tiny larvae called miracidia emerge and begin to burrow, but they don't stay in the gut. They migrate deliberately through the snail's internal tissues, navigating toward a very specific destination, the hepatopancreas, the snail's equivalent of a liver. Here, the larvae settle in and begin feeding, growing, developing. Over the following weeks, the larvae undergo a transformation. They organize themselves into long, tube-shaped structures, the broodsacs. These broodsacs are essentially living sausage casings packed with hundreds of developing larvae, and they begin to grow toward the snail's head. They push through connective tissue, threading through the body cavity until they reach the tentacles. Once a broodsac invades an eye stalk, the transformation becomes visible and grotesque. The tentacle swells dramatically. The broodsac fills it completely, stretching the thin skin taut. The banding pattern appears vivid stripes of green, yellow-brown, and white that ripple along the length of the tentacle in rhythmic contractions. Under a microscope, you can see the individual larvae packed inside, their collective movement creating the pulsating effect visible to the naked eye. The resemblance to a caterpillar is not accidental. It is the product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure, selecting for the most convincing visual mimicry possible. Broodsacs that looked more like caterpillars attracted more birds. More birds meant more successful reproduction. Over deep time, the deception was refined into something almost perfect. A counterfeit insect performed by an organism that has no eyes, no brain, and no concept of what a caterpillar looks like. But visual mimicry is only half the weapon. The other half is behavioral manipulation. A healthy amber snail is photophobic. It actively avoids light. It feeds at night or during overcast conditions. It retreats to dark, humid microhabitats during the day. This behavior keeps it hidden from predators. It is the single most important survival strategy the snail possesses. The parasite dismantles it entirely. Infected snails exhibit dramatically altered behavior. They become photophilic, actively attracted to light. They climb to exposed positions on vegetation during peak daylight hours, precisely when insectivorous birds are most actively foraging. They sit motionless on the tops of leaves, tentacles extended, pulsating broodsacs on full display. The parasite has flipped the snail's most deeply embedded behavioral switch from hide to advertise. The mechanism behind this neurological hijacking is still being studied. And here is where the story takes its strangest turn. When a bird plucks the infected tentacle from the snail's head, the snail doesn't die. The eye stalk is gone. The broodsac and its hundreds of larvae have been ripped away and swallowed. But the snail survives. It retreats back into the shadows, begins to heal, and over time, remarkably, the tentacle regenerates. And the parasite is still inside. The broodsac in the hepatopancreas continues to produce new tubes of larvae. Within weeks, a new broodsac migrates into the freshly regrown tentacle. The eye stalk swells again. The cycle repeats. The same snail can be harvested again and again, a renewable resource. Nothing about this is normal. Most parasites kill their hosts, or at minimum, abandon them after transmission. Leucochloridium paradoxum keeps its host alive specifically, so it can be exploited multiple times. It is, in a sense, farming the snail. Every element of this life cycle is an answer to an engineering problem. How do I get from point A, a snail on a forest floor, to point B, a songbird's intestine? The answer is a Rube Goldberg machine of biological manipulation, and every component was assembled by blind natural selection over millions of years. When we talk about parasites that control minds, we often reach for the dramatic zombies, puppet masters, hijacked brains. But the green-banded broodsac doesn't need drama. It doesn't need metaphor. The reality is already more disturbing than any fiction could manufacture. There is no malice in this. There is no intelligence behind it. There is only pressure, the pressure to reproduce, applied across millions of generations, sculpting an organism into something so precisely, exquisitely horrifying that it feels designed. But it wasn't designed. It was selected. And that might be the most unsettling part of all, because it means nature didn't just allow this. Nature rewarded it. Every generation of Leucochloridium that was slightly better at mimicry, slightly better at manipulation, slightly better at keeping its host alive for one more harvest that generation won. The green-banded broodsac is not an aberration. It is what success looks like when the only rule is survival and nothing else matters. Stay on the boat. Don't look down. For more investigations into the dark, bizarre, and unbelievable side of nature, subscribe to Dark Biology. You will never look at the world the same way again.